Sometimes the events of a week come along and hijack what a preacher was planning to do with his or her sermon. And they turn it in at least a slightly different direction, if not set it on an altogether new course. And they result in some revised points of emphasis and cause the one preparing it to say something like, "Holy Spirit, don't fail me now." Which, come to think of it, is probably not a bad prayer before any sermon. But it seems especially appropriate this week when so many of my preacher colleagues and I have had to change course. What I had planned to do this week was to focus all of our attention on joyously welcoming Katie Stredheck Singer, taking Paul's prayer to the Colossians as a guide for how we might pray for each other, Katie for us and us for Katie, in these days and months and years ahead, as together we begin something new. I have to tell you, I'm very excited about what God is going to do among us. The first part of Colossians does indeed give us plenty of material to shape our prayers for each other. Paul says that he prays for the Colossians with thanksgiving because he's heard all about their faith in Jesus and their love for all God's people, the faith and love which flow out of hope from on high. When I read that, I thought about how our APNC saw Katie's pastor information form and just knew that you were the one. And when you saw Emmanuel's myth, Katie, you got excited. There was a Skype interview scheduled right away. We started to hear more about each other and what we'd accomplished and were accomplishing. You and your ministry, Emmanuel, in and through our community of faith. First it was just you and the APNC and I, but then you were cleared to come and preach here in May, and the larger congregation was brought in. You've come to know about what God has used you to accomplish in Franklin and elsewhere, loving that congregation into a new sense of trust, mobilizing people to use their gifts, helping shelter the homeless, and starting a community garden at the church, among many other things. And you have heard how God has used us to do the work of love here in various ways in the past. Just yesterday, you could have seen it in the congregational care committee hosting a reception in this space after a memorial service for Harry Hoft, who is a beloved saint of this church. You might have heard it in the report last Sunday of our youth and adult habitat volunteers when they returned from Chambersburg, and how Sean Holler spoke not just of the family they built the house for, but the family that is Emmanuel Presbyterian Church. You would and will witness it in worship services and small groups and share drives and resettling refugees. If you'll get it in the fondness with which we still speak of our work with the dreamers, the dreamer kids who have headed off to college and beyond, and the concern we have for them still, including those who, like Jermaine Hales, went in the wrong direction. Here's a wonderful thing. You'll help us to do the work of love in new and creative ways that we have not yet even imagined, ways that will energize and inspire us. We can give thanks that the hopeful message, the good news that God's embodied love is stronger than fear and division and death, has been bearing fruit in you and in us, and that it's growing in the whole world, sometimes despite all evidence to the contrary. Joyful thanksgiving for each other and for God's work among us is a great place for us all to start and keep coming back to. Let's all of us covenant to keep gratitude at the heart of our prayers. Gratitude for each other and for our gifts, Emmanuel's gifts and your gifts. But more than that, much more than that, let's be thankful for the gospel, the good news. Because Paul tells the Colossians that it's the gospel, good news of God's love for the whole world, made flesh in Jesus and through his Spirit and the rest of us, that has come to them and is producing results among them and in the whole world. Paul says it's the message. Did you get that? The message that's bearing fruit. When you really get it, that is, when you truly comprehend that a God of grace loves the whole world, no exceptions, and that God's love calls us to action, particularly on behalf of the hurting, the marginalized, the threatened, and those who are unjustly treated. When you understand that the Spirit can work through through us to make a difference. The message of God's embodied love through the Spirit bears good fruit in the lives of individuals and communities and in the world. Which brings us to the events of this past week in our country, because they too point to how messages can bear fruit, and not necessarily the good kind, which is why we have to be extremely careful to put out the right message and stick with it. When people watched Alden Sterling being shot when he was pinned to the ground in Baton Rouge, and Philando Castile being shot sitting in his car at a traffic stop for a busted taillight, people rightly asked if those men were white. And other than that, the circumstances in each case were exactly the same. Would officers have shot them? And the honest answer would be almost certainly not. Why does the color of a person's skin subject them to a higher chance of being killed by people in power? In part, it's because of the messages that we hear or tell, or even just sub or unconsciously internalize about them. Our African American brothers and sisters want us to examine those messages and ask if they truly line up with the gospel we say we proclaim. They are well past tired of being painted with a broad brush, well past ready to be judged on the content of their characters and not the color of their skin. And yes, in every group, there are a few bad apples. Newt Gingrich said this, what I'm about to say. Newt Gingrich. He said this: "It took me a long time and a number of people talking to me through the years to get a sense of this. If you are a normal white American, the truth is you don't understand being black in America, and you instinctively underestimate the level of discrimination and the level of additional risk." Did you hear that? And then Dallas happened. One angry, disaffected African-American man, a sniper shooting 12 officers and killing 5 of them at a peaceful protest against unjust treatment, which was being protected by the police. It was nothing less than an act of terror. I tell you, when that happened, I was hard-pressed for a few days to hold on to our hope from on high. Maybe you know what that feels like. Here was a man filled with such rage who had bought into a message of hatred for the police and for white people, a message that the vast, vast majority of Black Lives Matter supporters and others do not embrace. A message similar, by the way, to the one that if you spend any time on the internet, you can hear from white people about the government and black people. There is terrible rhetoric, awful messaging out there on both extremes. Anti-government, anti-authority, anti-white, anti-black, anti-immigrant. And those messages bear fruit, and it's not good fruit. Which is why we have to stay on message. We have to give thanks for the gospel of God's grace, for the good news of God's love for all people, and not just a small group of people like us. We have to keep clinging to the message that love is stronger than death and fear and hatred and division. That's our message. Which means we have to keep advocating for people who are unjustly treated, welcoming the stranger in need. Keep reaching out to people who don't see eye to eye with us politically or religiously on various issues. Keep on using our resources of time and talent and money to be a blessing to others in the name of love. It can be all too easy to get discouraged, to lose focus, especially in a world that is so filled with counter messages. I think this may be why Paul goes on to pray for the Colossians that they be filled with the knowledge of God's will in all spiritual understanding, that they might live lives worthy of the Lord, bearing fruit and growing in the knowledge of God. This is what Paul prays for them, that they can have the ability to discern God's will. Sometimes I think it's really hard to discern God's will, like when you're trying to decide what college to go to, or which fork in the road to take when you're confused about directions. But most often, I think God's will is fairly easy to understand. God's will is about loving each other, working to understand each other. That's what God's will is about. Several stories. First, from a white police officer. This about an African-American family. He wrote, "This lady saw me parked at City Park this morning and decided to stop. She exited her vehicle with her 2 children and approached me as I was seated in my patrol car. She simply stated that she wanted to pray for me, specifically for my safety. I expressed my gratitude as best I could, but really she has no idea how much that meant to me. Her little boy handed me a wilted flower that looked as if it had been in his pocket for a week. At that moment, it was the most beautiful flower I'd ever seen. My prayer is that sharing this encounter with an African-American family will encourage many people and give people a chance. Regardless of race or profession, you simply cannot judge an entire group of people because of the actions of some. Don't hate evil more than you love good." Second story, this from an African-American woman. She lives in Andover. This was a Facebook post of hers the day after the shootings. Natasha Howard. "So this morning I went into a convenience store to get a protein bar. As I walked through the door, I noticed that there were 2 white police officers, one about my age and the other several years older, talking to the clerk, an older white woman, behind the counter about the shootings that have gone on in the past few days. They all looked at me and fell silent. I went about my business to get what I was looking for. As I turned back up the aisle to go pay, the oldest officer was standing at the top of the aisle watching me. As I got closer, he asked me, 'How are you doing?' I replied, 'Okay, and you?' He looked at me with a strange look and asked me, 'No, how are you really doing?' I looked at him and I said, 'I'm tired.' His reply was, 'Me too.' Then he said, 'I guess it's not easy being either of us right now, is it?' I said, 'No, it's not.' Then he hugged me and I cried. I had never seen that man before in my life," she wrote. "I have no idea why he was moved to talk to me. What I know is that he and I shared a moment this morning that was absolutely beautiful. No judgments, no justifications, just 2 people sharing a moment." I've got an idea what moved him to talk to her. It's the message of the gospel. Speaking of which, I had a wonderful conversation this week with 3 people with whom I do not see eye to eye on everything, to put it mildly. What we have in common is a desire for gun violence to decrease. What we have in common is a love for Christ Jesus and an understanding that the gospel means that we talk to each other and try to do what we can to make a positive difference in the world. That's the hope that is laid up